Okay, I wanted to do a quick rendering video to give a few little details on how I mix paint and how I kind of go about doing this whole thing. So, hopefully you can see this well. So I'll do this chair in blue, and what I typically like to do is, as I start with my paint tray here, you can see I've got blue, and I'll start mixing the color. And what I try to do is have some black close by, or maybe a little bit of yellow, some of the other colors that I'll mix with it to get the color that I want. But what I do is I get my paint going, and then I start with the lighter colors, and so I will just work on the edge of the paint that I've worked with here, and I'll add water to it so that I'm only going to get a little bit of color, and then I start painting with that. And then as I want more and more color, I'll use less water and more of the paint pigment so that I get a darker color. But I'll start with this, and I'll just start with the lightest areas. I can always go back and add more color. But the nice thing about watercolor is that you can pull that color with your brush. So even if I get this on and I think, oh, I don't have, I have a little too much paint there, I can actually just dry my brush off and go back in and pull some of that off. Or add a little bit more water and just move the paint around. Watercolor is pretty forgiving, but I'll just go in and just basically add the light color to where I want everything first. And on some of these areas that I know I want it to be even lighter, I probably won't add any color because I'll go in and pull just a little bit of color over that later. But you can see this is really pretty pale as far as color goes. But I'll go in and I know that this side is my darkest, so even if I get a little more color on this, I'm okay with that. But what I want to do too is I want to be careful not to put too much water on this to begin with, because it will, I want it to dry pretty quick so that I can keep working on it. So once I have my color in there, then I will start to go back in, and now I'll come back into my tray and I'll pull a little more of the color and use less water, and I kind of will make a spot on my tray and kind of see where it's at. And if I think I need more color, I'll pull a little more until I get the colors that I want. And then I'll go back in and add a little more color. And really, depending on how the paper takes that color, is if I'll stop working with it at that point and let it dry a little bit more, or I'll keep working with it. But what's nice is I can actually put some color on here, like this, and then just with my brush and maybe a little bit of water, I can pull that paint color around to where I want it. So I'm really not adding any more paint at this point. I'm just moving the paint that's already on my paper around. Hopefully that makes some sense. So really, I'm just dipping in my water cup. And then I look at some of the other areas where I know I have more color, and I'll start to pull in some of that color in here. And again, I can put that color on, and then I can fade it in with just a little bit of water on the edges to feather that out. And so I don't get harsh lines. I usually have quite a few paper towels hanging around so that I can dry my brush off. Then I'll go back in and I can even pull more color. I can add a little black to it if I want it even darker. And what I'll usually do is I'll just mix, if you can see that, I'll mix different, I won't mix the whole thing, I'll just mix parts of it, because I can always pull a little more color into this, or I can pull just a little bit of that dark into more blue. But I try not to mix it all together because then I can't go back. But now I still have my light blues, I have all my different tones, and I can use bits and parts of those as I'm trying to mix and apply that color to my chair. So then I can go back in and I can pull this here. I haven't added any more paint to my brush. I'm actually adding water and pulling that color and blending it in. And even to the edges, because you actually have a little bit of reflected light on these edges. So I don't want the dark to go all the way over there. Some of the darkest point area on this chair was this right here. So I'll come in with this here, and this will probably be the least amount of water or the darkest pigment as I work with this. And I can come back in when this is a little bit drier and add a little more of my paint, or when the paint on my tray starts to dry up a little bit and I can add less water to it, then I can get more of what I'm looking for. But I just keep working around on my edges, on those areas that just keep adding color. Keep the integrity of those spaces that you want to have the lightest. It's always easy, you can always go back in and add more paint later, but it's really hard to take it away once you've got it there. If I want a little more color in here, I can add that. But did you see how I could actually soften that edge right there with just a little more water on the color? I can do that here. That's what I love about watercolor, is it is quite forgiving and you can add that. But yet you still let the attributes of watercolor I love too, because you get some of that modeling and it's not perfect. So don't expect it to be perfect. I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to just work on the bottom portion of the chair. And again, I'm working with some black here, and I'm just adding a little bit of water to it because I want some light and I want some dark. So I'll work with this area to add in some of the reflections on the bottom of the chair. And I won't need very much paint because I can use this darker point, and I can also use the lighter and add a little more water. So I come down here and you've got the reflections on the center of this, and so I'll go in and put some of that, because I can go in and add a little water and lighten that up a little bit. But I'll just put some of the reflective, because it's a metal, so it's got those reflections on it. But I'll just come in and just add some of those lines, and I usually try to keep the lines going the direction that the shading is going. But I can go over this and extend just a little bit of the gray color through across, and then I'll go in and I may use a smaller brush, and then I don't want to use a ton of water because I want to to get a little bit more of the dark. So here's all I did. Very little bit of water, but now I can get some of those darker piece tones, the black, and I can go back in with my smaller brush and add in some of those darker reflections. But because my paper's already wet, that blends in really nice. And I don't want much, I just want to have, and if it ends up being too dark, and I can always go back with some water and soften that. So where I got this one a little darker than I wanted it, I can actually go in and soften that up, just like that. Like that. I have a little bit on this, the handle here. And I got more water on that than I wanted, but with my brush I can actually remove that water. Like that. So then I'll go in, and there's a couple different ways I can do this, the flooring on this. So I have a paintbrush that has a flat tip, and because it's a wood plank, then I can use this to get me some of those lines. So add some water here and just mix me up a brown color. And I kind of play with it. I mean, it's not exact from what is on the page, but I just get a brown that I like. But I also have these other colors with me, so if I want to have, wood flooring's never the same. So I get that, and then I can actually come in here and give me some lines that will give me more of a wood plank look. I may play with the colors just a little bit. But all that does is just give me that, those lines to go with as far as a flooring look goes. Not that I'll do the whole thing with this, but it's just one way of doing it. And I want some variety here. So I'm going to have some different colored planks coming in here. And then what I'll do is I will they don't have to be perfect, just kind of give me some of those lines, and then I'll actually go over it with a tone that will tie it all together, basically. Fairly light. You do have that right across the back, you do have that darkest spot, so you may want to come in with a little bit of a darker shading.